Good morning, and welcome to Issues That Matter. And we have another information-packed show for you today. And so please open up your minds and absorb what we're going to be telling you and talking about. I have the honor and privilege of having a great guest co-host again. We also have a wonderful guest, a return guest. And I always like to have return guests because it gives me a pat on the back for the first time. In any event, Catherine Ann Wilson, welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much.
And I'm going to be taking a back seat for much of this show because I have very little to contribute here.
That's not true.
That said, Jennifer Wiesner.
Yes.
Got that right this time.
Yes, you did.
I'm proud of myself now.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you back.
Appreciate
and
it.
I can see by the array of books there, you've got a lot to talk about.
We have
So
lots
rather
to chat about
than me
today.
just blather on, I'm going to kick it over to Catherine here. Catherine,
Yay.
take it away.
Yay. So excited to have you back. Our first show with you was just amazing, where we talked about healthy sexuality from birth to around 8 years old. So for those of you who haven't seen the first show or know about Jennifer's background, tell them what you're a licensed clinical social worker and you're C-SECT certified sex.
And the ASECT, which is the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, certified sex therapist. And for a while, I was the only woman in the state of Maine certified as such.
And when were you certified?
I think it was 2012.
So 2012, you were the first female.
I was the only female.
The only female
The
at
only
the time.
female,
We've
yeah.
come a long way, baby.
Yes, we have, because there's now 3 other wonderful women also.
Any ideas how many male people there are?
Before me, there was only one, and he had been the only one for many, many years, and he offered this torch to me. And so then I became number 2 and the only female. And now I have 3 other wonderful colleagues who are also doing different, we're all sex therapists, but doing different types of specialities within that. So, and it's great because we have that support system and we're able to help more people, which is great.
Well, you specifically, what you do and the way you do it, I don't care what it is, if it's a painter, if it's a plumber, if it's a dog trainer, there is nothing as riveting as someone who is passionate about what they do. That is just really like this isn't a job for you, this is your passion, and it really comes through in your extraordinary level of education and experience. You've been teaching classes for families, along with all of your other, your private practice and your other educational nuances that you do, but the healthy sexuality around kids for families just touches my heart. I just love our first time and so happy to have you here the second time.
Thank you.
So this is like part 2, and in part 2 we're going to talk about pre-adolescence and adolescence, right? So when we left off last time, was there anything sort of about that birth to 8 that you feel like you didn't cover then that you'd like to start with today, or should we just dive right in?
I think, oh my gosh, we could spend time,
Right.
hours and hours and hours on all of this.
Well, we couldn't do it in just one show.
We couldn't.
Right?
I know that, we at the end had to sort of quick get in all the resources for parents.
Right.
But I think, really what we want to know from that time from birth on is if we normalize sexuality from the time that children are born, then it's all they know.
Right.
That's their normal. And
we create their normal.
We create
so
their normal.
if we call a vagina a wee-wee or a penis some weird name, and we put shame, whether intentional or not, just energetically, cover up, or we sort of instill our own uncomfortableness into our children, that's sort of setting that normal, right?
The normal would be that we don't talk about these topics.
Yeah.
We don't talk about body parts, and for children it's like, well, we talk about my elbows and we talk about my knees and toes. Why don't we talk about these parts? And so then we start the idea of secrecy, taboo, maybe, and even shame.
And even shame.
Yeah. So I know we did talk about that last time, and I think just to piggyback on that idea that, we want to start young.
Right.
And we want to start those positive messages so as they grow, they can have positive body image, and they can have the foundation for consent and boundaries and all of those things that are going to become very necessary as they continue to grow and grow into pre-adolescence and into their own sexuality as they grow. So that stuff is really important. However, we don't want our listeners here to be thinking like, oh no, I didn't start young.
Right.
What do I do?
My child's 9 years old. I've ruined them.
Yes, and I do have parents that come to my workshops and ask that, you know, like, have I ruined them because I haven't started young? And you've heard me say this last time, it's okay if you're tardy to the party.
Right.
It just means that you do have some groundwork to make up, and you do have to start those conversations. And all really what it means is that it's just going to take a little longer. It's going to be a little harder because I would say by the 9 years old mark, they start to be like, la, 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 I can't hear you, I don't want to hear you. And so we want to make sure that if we haven't been providing that information, that it's the time to start, and you need to get educated on how to do that. And whether you come to like one of my Raising Sexually Healthy Children workshops, or you get some of these resources, or go online and start looking at how do I start these conversations with my kiddos.
Now, your website will go on the bottom of the screen on this show, and all the resources that you're going to show, so people can really just sit back and pay attention and listen to you on this show.
Great.
And
That's great.
not worry that they're going to miss not writing down or getting the name right or the title right. So they can go to your website and have access to all the books that you're talking about today and all the resources.
So that I have all my books on the resource. I always welcome anyone to reach out to me via email, and they can ask, what's the best book for me to get for my 7-year-old, my 9-year-old, my 12-year-old, my 14-year-old?
And all that, they can reach you through your website.
Yep, they certainly can.
Okay, so moving into our pre-adolescence.
Yeah.
How do we begin here?
So like I said, if that's where we're starting, if that's where you're starting because we don't know what we don't know, right? And most of us, the majority of us, did not have parents that talked to us about this stuff, right? I don't know. Did your parents talk to you about this, Bob?
No.
No? How about you, Kathy?
They really didn't. They did call a penis, a vagina, and they were comfortable in their own skin, their own body. So I didn't get that. But as far as explaining anything else, you know, it was really what I learned in school or read in a magazine or what the kids
on the
talked
street,
about
right?
or learned on the street. Yeah.
I learned on the street.
On the street, right. And so, you know,
Brooklyn, no less. I listen.
And, you know, we have to think about now is what we know is on the street, does that fit as a family, your values and what you want to impart to your kids?
Boy, that's important.
Yeah, our movies, media.
The world has changed.
Exactly, Bob. So it has, and every generation can say that. You know, we can normalize that, oh, kids of today. But what we do know is that they have instant gratification with regards to getting information on the internet. And so we have to realize that with smartphone technology, they can also be looking at porn in the back of the bus. They can be showing pictures to their friends at a moment's notice. And in adolescence, that is the culture. And when I say that, I mean using phones for just about everything, for communication, for research, for everything, and tablets and computers. And so
it's not the Sears catalog bra and underwear section anymore.
And
it's actually porno. And some of the movies, the television, the cable shows, I'm like shocked how much they show as far, and I'm not talking about loving, consensual, kind lovemaking. I'm talking about how many violent rapes. And, you know, I love CSI. You know, I love, as a victim myself, I love to see, you know, justice in 30 minutes. You know, justice wins. But from a mother and I'm a grandmother of 5 kids, I'm like, wow, how many, they're showing the violence, they're showing that crime, not just the justice, but the crime. With our adolescent children, do you know how many rapes and acts of violence that they see? What is the average?
Oh, I don't know that, but I can only imagine. Like you said, if we do that cross-section from movies to television to videos, and even, we don't even have to go as, you know, swing the pendulum as far as those kinds of violent crimes, but just the general disrespect and and I can't even think of another word. It's a disrespect or
I like that. It is disrespectful. So our mission, if we choose to accept it as parents, and hopefully so, because I believe it is our responsibility to raise these children, is to kind of be the anti-venom to what they're being pervasively invaded with, the messages that they're receiving out in the world.
And so how do we become that anti-venom?
How do we become that
Venom,
anti-venom?
rather.
Yeah.
And how do we do that is we have to start. The parents come to me and often will talk about how they feel. A couple things. One, I don't want to give them too much information. Two, I don't know where to start. Three, I don't want to, I'm fearful that I'm not going to give them the right information. So all of these fears are getting in the way.
So it's like a block. So
it's
rather
a block,
than do
sure.
something,
So they do
doing
nothing. And that's sort of, again, this pendulum then swings the other way. It's like we do nothing. And so what I often will say is it doesn't have to be that you're giving all the information, certainly not at all at one time. You'd overload them.
Yeah.
You know, we don't
Not
want to do
a
that.
whiteboard lecture for a half an hour.
Oh, goodness, no. But really just start saying, this is an important topic. You know, so sometimes I'll suggest to parents to say, you know, sometimes after the workshop, I'll suggest that they go home to their kids and say something like, you know, if they say, where have you been? Say, you know what, I went to a workshop tonight on sexuality, healthy sexuality and youth. And you know what, I realized that I have not been talking about this stuff with you, and I realized tonight how important it is. And so I want to let you know, I want to let you know that we're going to start talking about this stuff, and even though it might be uncomfortable for you, guess what? It's really uncomfortable for me because my parents didn't do that for me. They didn't know either. And so it might be, you know, I might be embarrassed giving you the information, you may be embarrassed hearing it, but you know what? It's natural, and it's really important for your health, your well-being, and your future relationships that we talk about this.
That's beautiful, Jennifer.
Yeah, it's about, you know, and that's how much I love you, is I'm willing to sit in my discomfort to do that for you.
How do you negotiate, in your talking about issues with your son or your daughter, how do you negotiate the fact that something that might not have been acceptable yesterday today is acceptable because of the change in society norm? And how do you teach them how to determine how far they can go?
I wonder if the first gut instinct I had around that was thinking about, it's important, the other huge component of all of this, and it's something that I do not provide in my workshops, is your values. And so it's really up to a parent, because a parent is it's the one thing a parent can give their child that nobody else can, is their values. And so I think that has to do with a values question about, yes, things may be different from how they were in the past, but what are our values as a family? What do I as a parent want you to take away from this? What are the expectations that we have of you as a part of our family culture that I want you to live by? And what I usually will say is also think about that your child, their job is to grow and differentiate from you. That is a job well done. So know that you give them your values as they grow as a compass to live by, but knowing that over time they're going to start through their their adolescence and young adulthood to start developing their own values. So I think that's a value, for me, it's a values question. What do you want to teach your child? Because if we just go by if they go by just what they're seeing out in culture, that may not be what we want them to take in.
The issue, as I see it, is that the values that you hold today, as quickly as tomorrow, those values might now become, or might then become, taboo. They might then become the values of a bigot.
You're right. Things are constantly changing, kind of like technology, and it's evolving. We can't keep up with all the evolution, especially in technology. So I think it's having constant, open, and let me tweak that word, constant, many open conversations with your kids about what their thoughts are and what your thoughts are. I think when we go through adolescence, we should be doing a lot more listening than talking. So if we're giving them information, say, so what do you think about that? You know, we're coming home from a soccer game and maybe we witness, say it's a boy getting shut down by a girl, and you could see his face and be like, how would you feel if that just happened to you? Because it's also building their critical thinking skills as well as helping them as a parent figure out relationships and how to behave and how to act and how to be respectful.
Right. I love that. Instead of telling them what you think their response or answer should be, I love that you are suggesting that people ask their child so their child can use their own brain and process and use that critical thinking skill. I love that.
I know you've heard me say this often, is we want to help them develop that muscle.
Right.
And they can't develop it if we're not asking those questions or noticing when they're in a situation and help them think it through. So a lot more, how do you feel about it versus this is what you need to do.
Right. So the parents and grandparents that are listening, okay, so they're going to be uncomfortable. They can admit their uncomfortableness.
Yes, own it. You have to own it.
Own it with their, I love that authenticity.
So if you see, if you feel your neck or your face getting red because you're having these talks with your kiddo, you got to own that, because what'll happen is the child will see that and start to feel embarrassed for you.
Yeah.
They become unavailable.
True. Right.
Or they want to caretake for you, like,
Right.
oh gosh, make this stop because my parent is getting upset. And then they'll also, that energy is, oh, this is not really comfortable. We shouldn't be talking about these things. So own it. Say, hey,
they say,
it's uncomfortable.
Is my face getting red right now because I feel like it's so hot in here, because I'm embarrassed?
Because I'm embarrassed, because I've never had to do this before.
Right.
Yeah, it's not intuitive,
So
not in our culture.
the parents and grandparents that are listening, who are willing to be authentic, they're willing to say, this is uncomfortable. What do you think about this? How would you respond to that? What are your thoughts about that? I want to bring in your resources, because for me personally, I'm more comfortable if I've got some tools, right?
Sure.
So I can say I'm uncomfortable, that's easy, but if I'm going to talk to them about issues, I don't know how to talk at their particular age level. So do you have resources, segue,
Yes.
segue,
Sure.
that parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles can look at that would help us sort of know what's age appropriate?
Yes, and I brought some books that are great for just kids to read, as well as things for parents. And every book I suggest that you're going to give to your child to read.
Read first.
Read first.
Hello.
Again, if you want your values on board, because guess what? Maybe a book that I'm suggesting might have differing values than what you want to present to your child. So I always suggest read them first. But like this one, Talk to Me First by Deborah Rothman. This is great because it helps you become exactly what I often talk about, is the askable parent. You know, this is sort of if you want to position yourself as the person who will be the source for your child will have other sources, but we really want to position a parent to be a main source of information, because what we know is there was a study that came out of the UK a while back, but it said that 44% of teenagers said that they don't trust information they get from their peers. And 75% of them said they wanted to talk more about these topics with their parents. And so they're looking for it, they want it. It's us who have to get over our discomfort and fear about doing that. I did, well actually I'll hold that, I'll just finish with this first. But so this is great for parents, also the Sex-Wise Parent as well. Great resource for parents to figure out, how do I want to present these topics, what's developmentally appropriate, and how do I go about that. And then these books here are great for, this one also is great for that. For some, they're starting at tweens. Tweens are dating. I'm hearing this, and so
I understand that there's a maturity level aspect to
sure,
this.
some,
but on the average, when are our kids dating?
It depends how you, and our definition of dating might be very different to theirs. And so we could spend a whole show on that.
My
But
13-year-old grandson has a girlfriend.
Yeah.
And so
Your
there's
what grandson?
my 13-year-old grandson. And so my daughter has, rules.
Yes.
About texting, about
Sure.
pictures back and forth, about what's appropriate, where the two of them can be together, where they can go.
Supervision, all of that kind of stuff. And so this book, I think what I like about it from Amy Lang, she's out on the West Coast. And what I like about this book is, first, it's great for parents to read, but it's also something you can give your child as a guidebook. And the other piece I like is that she talks about to date, relate, or wait. And I love that because, there are people you may want. There's options, and I think that's the piece.
Yeah.
It's not all or nothing, and it gives you a way to conceptualize, how do I want to be with this person? So that's another resource for both. And then my young son, he's like, when I say, oh, where's Spare Me the Talk? He goes, oh, you mean the shoe book? It says shoes on it, so we call it the shoe book. It has nothing to do about shoes.
But
anyway,
Taylor's, it's a great book.
So Spare Me the Talk, they also do one, this is specifically boys, they also do girls. She does, Joe Langford rather, he does a book about girls as well. And so this is just for the guys. This is a book that's going to talk about personal safety, responsibility, STIs, all different types of sexual behavior, relationships, gender, all of that stuff. So this is something just for the boys. And so depending on when your child is going through adolescence, this could be a book from 12 on up, depending on, when they're beginning their going through puberty. So
This is going to sound like a stupid question.
Yeah.
Probably is a
No
stupid
stupid
question. But if the child is a daughter, who should be having this discussion with the daughter?
that's a great question,
The mother
Bob.
or the father?
It's a great question because it's one of the popular ones that comes to my workshop. And there's no perfect answer for it. And neither is there no right or wrong, because in divorced households, you might not have options of who that is. And actually, I am a sex therapist, and so my children, by virtue of what I do, I have 2 sons, they come to me for that information, not their father. And so it's just, that's sort of an interesting just situation that had occurred that I didn't even realize was occurring until it was. But what we do know is, both through sort of the anecdotal research in my own workshops of having over 500 people go through the workshops now, and what we see in the literature, is that the mothers are driving this bus, regardless of the gender of the children. The mothers are the one who somehow have become, designated drivers for these conversations. And that's unfortunate, because if you are in a heterosexual relationship and you're parenting together and you have a daughter, where's your daughter learning about relationships but from what's being modeled in the home? Right. How is your daughter understanding how men should behave and act? From their father, if they're living with them. How do they know how to navigate conflict with someone of the opposite gender?
But behavior on the home front may be much different than behavior out in the wild, you might say.
It could be, but we still know that from the time that they're born, they're absorbing all of this information from us.
Tell me about the well-fathered daughter again. I think this is a great place to put in that information.
It is, because we see it, especially more so. We see the benefits and the outcomes as they get older. To bastardize it a little bit, because I won't know it all by heart, but there's studies out there that talk about the well-fathered daughter, and what they see is that for daughters who have had an engaged father, meaning someone who's involved in their lives, who's interested in what they're doing, who's supporting them, who's talking with them, open communication about all types of topics, and who is able to be present through their adolescence, we see outcomes when they are in their young adulthood and on, that some of the outcomes, I think, have to do with longer time in school, delay of first onset of sexual behavior, interesting higher paying careers. Like, we see all these really interesting outcomes, and more marital satisfaction or relational satisfaction. So
Love that.
Yeah, that's really important. So when I have only 1 or 2 dads coming to my workshop, I've realized that. I think it's, I've looked at it, just sort of, not exactly, but about 85% of people who come to my workshops are the moms. So I've specifically had dad workshops so they can make sure they feel that this isn't just about moms. It's critical that they are a part of this. I mean, we could go on and on about how the ripples can go out with regards to, relational satisfaction, just about trying to rid ourselves of rape culture, et cetera.
Right.
Girls need to understand.
So on
how to be
that
with
particular workshop that you do for dads, so is that, weeks and weeks of, a couple of hours every weeknight, one night a week, whatever, just so guys and families get an idea of the investment? It's not that huge, right? It's just like
for a 2.5-hour workshop.
Boom.
I did one recently in Falmouth at an orthodontic practice. They hosted me, and it was wonderful. Yeah. And they are hungry for information, but getting them to come is really difficult.
And once they do, they're just like, rock on. This was awesome.
Yep.
Yeah,
it is.
And the kids in our society are the ones who benefit.
Totally.
Yeah.
I did want to jump back to something we touched it, and I thought, oh, I know it's one of the most popular things and worrisome that parents worry about is pornography.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned something about it briefly before. And just to have a reality check, again, in the literature, we see that often first initiation of seeing pornography is 10 years old. And so if you can't sort of buy into this.
That's fine. That's the age of my granddaughter. No, Elizabeth, no!
But we know that through just general curiosity, that isn't, if they have curiosity and we're not their source, and they don't have healthy books to look at to answer their questions, they may go there. And also just because they're, like I said, healthy curiosity. Then we also, we know that if they have access to computers that don't have, monitoring software or parent supervision, they're going to be there. So what is important is, like what I was saying, is if you can't buy into this as, why you would need to talk to your child about sexuality, and even more so as they enter into their pre-adolescence and adolescence, this would be a reason, is because what we also know, and this will make your stomach turn as well, is, what's coming out in the literature more and more is that, how do they say it, that teenage boys are using pornography as a source of sex education more than they ever have. And what we know is pornography is not sex education, not even close. And so some people will say, how do I talk about this? And what you can let them know is what it is. That, Amy Lang, in her information, she has the Dating Smarts book, she talks about how letting kids know that pornography is it's images that people, movies and images that people take of themselves, and they choose to share them on the internet, and that, kids' hearts, bodies, and brains are not ready for that type of stuff, and nor is it anything like a relationship, that it's cut and pasted images and, specifically posed shots. This is not a relationship.
I don't want to lose what you're saying, because what you're saying is really important. So let's say a mom or father, mom or dad, finds their son or daughter looking at pornography. So as soon as they recognize that that's what their child is doing, what is the appropriate reaction? Is it to throw a fit and yell and scream and shame the child and, whack them with the book or something? What is the appropriate, okay, I see it, what is my next thing to do?
I think
besides breathe.
If that was on a SAT question, we would know that would be the one you could omit completely from the other viable answers, because having that kind of reaction, we know, is never a good thing. Right. For many reasons. One, you've initiated their shutdown. Yeah. Right there. There's shame, which is another thing we don't want, because it's a sticky business shame. It kind of hangs on. And then we also know that it doesn't open up a conversation to even find out what's happening.
So you see it.
So you see it and you say, whoa, I see, whether you see on their computer and say, I see that you're looking at what we would call pornography. Tell me what's going on here.
And I'm imagining, this is just devil's advocate, and I'm imagining, I'll just say a boy, just for the heck, because you said boys. So, and I can see my 13-year-old boy in this scenario saying, I know, I don't want to talk about it.
Yes.
So, you're getting pushback.
Sure.
So, and I already don't want to talk about it.
Right.
So how do I handle the pushback? I acknowledge it. I'm kind about, I noticed that you're looking at pornography and now there's pushback. What's my next response?
And I might be like, I know that you know, and I know this is uncomfortable, and I can see that it's uncomfortable for you. That makes sense. And that might be one direction. The other one, if you're feeling as a parent activated inside or, reactive, the best thing to do is say, I see that, all right, I'm going to give you a little bit of space about this right now. I'll take a little bit of space, and then, in about 15 minutes, we'll come down and we'll talk about it, or I'll come back up. Give yourself some space. You don't always have to have an answer, because a lot of times when we see that, it's a fight. You go to your amygdala, your primal brain, and you go from your reasoning place, your prefrontal cortex, to here, and it's...
Yeah.
And so what we want to do is we want to take some space from it, and then gather yourself, calm yourself, think about how, what have you taught so far if you have. If you haven't, this may be the time to start gathering information of how do I want to approach this. Second
Scenario, somebody comes in, they see pornography, and it's just like sort of a laughing thing. I'm imagining a dad saying, that a boy, or, sort of making
it's come a long way since I've been there looking at it.
Right, sort of a male bonding sort of thing. What are the dangers about that being some sort of initiation into manhood?
Well, and I think the danger there is, first of all, you've just normalized that this is potentially,
right, I understand, yeah.
Normalize that this is okay and acceptable. And what we know is, again, kids' hearts, bodies, and brains are not only not ready for this, but it's something that, what is it teaching them about sexuality? What is it teaching them about relationships? But again, that's where the values are. This dad who might react that way, it's probably out of his own discomfort, and he may need to get educated about what are the effects, what are the potential detrimental effects of your child using this at whatever teenage age they are. I know as a sex therapist that I sit with many people who have, whether they've started with print, before computers, looking at pornography, or using computers for younger gentlemen that have come in as well as women, that it really can have an effect on their template for arousal and relationship going forward. Mm-hmm. It can. It doesn't every time. It can. Mm-hmm. And so what I've explained to my own sons is that think about anything that you do in repetition, whether it's shopping, gambling, being online, gaming. It becomes something in adolescence, what we call fires together, wires together.
What fires together, wires together.
And what that means is in adolescence, the brain is growing at a rapid rate. And it's also pruning away, kind of like cutting away from the back brainstem, information that they no longer need because they're growing out of those stages. So as it's pruning away, it's also creating all new synapses, all new connections in the brain. And so with those happening, what the research suggests is that the things that our kids do a lot of are the things that tend to fire and wire together. So if we're on the computer looking at pornography all the time through adolescence, we're building a connection there.
And that's sort of like a go-to for their brain.
It could be a go-to.
Yeah.
It can lead to that. It's like I say, it forms like a template around that. So for example, in my private practice, I might be working with a male or female who has, whether maybe they were bullied in school or rejected often in relationships, so they used pornography as to get aroused and to have that release. So they were using pornography, and what happens is they formed that connection there, and then they struggle in partnered experiences. And so we can't, the jury is still out there about cause and effect, but what we know is we're seeing a lot of troublesome connections there, and we know for sure that pornography is not healthy for children.
So we're talking about this because the evidence shows that this pre-adolescent time period, more and more boys are looking towards pornography as sex education. We also know that in middle school, children are acting out sexually, that it might not be intercourse. I remember a guidance counselor in a school system in Maine telling me that they were letting the high school know that this batch of kids are really highly sexual, and that that the kids were reporting that they didn't feel like it was actually sex because it wasn't intercourse, but it was a whole lot of other stuff going on, and they just didn't have the education around that can be dangerous as well with sexually transmitted diseases.
And that's a big piece in the workshop that I do for the 9 to 14 group, is because that is sort of the get around that some kids will use, is that, well, I'm engaging in oral sex or anal sex or other type of sexual behavior because either one, some kids will say, I can remain a virgin. And also they think that it isn't as sort of committing and it's not real sex, as you said. And so what we know is that there's so much more precautions that need to happen there that aren't happening because there's so much more risk with those behaviors. So yeah, if you can't buy into that this just needs to happen because we know it's healthy, what we know is that these things are starting earlier than you would expect, and they also can have very negative consequences. So educating our kids about what pornography is, that it's images online that people put on the internet, for their own enjoyment and excitement, and it's for kids of any age that it's not healthy for their bodies, brains, or hearts, and so it's not something that you should be looking at. And there are some kids who need sort of more of the why, and what we can say is that because we know when we do things in repetition on screens that it can affect our brains. And we love you too much to have a situation around this. And then you can talk about, again, with your values, about what you feel about pornography, about relationships, about as I said, what it is and what it isn't. And what it isn't is it's not sex education. It's not what a relationship doesn't talk anything or show anything about relationships. It shows sexual behavior for excitement. That's what it shows.
Can we talk about maturity for just a second? I have I'm thinking of a woman I know that has a young son, 14. And of course, because of you, I ask my friends who have adolescent children, have you talked to your son or daughter about boundaries, about sexual issues? I tell them about you. I encourage them to talk to their kids before their kids go away to do overnights, never mind camps of various, whatever. And I have been surprised by some of my friends saying, oh, he is this age, but he's immature for his age. And just totally using the excuse of he's young for his age
to not have
the conversation. And I'm thinking, your son is giving me the up and down when we're all at the beach. He's old enough. So
that's one of the myths.
Right.
My child isn't old enough is one, or my child isn't asking questions or showing interest in dating, so I don't need to address that.
That was the other thing I heard too. Well, he's not interested in girls at all, and I'm thinking.
But that's where I think we also make a mistake, is we wait until it happens.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like when I say that a lot of people think that when girls get their period, that is the beginning of puberty for them.
Right.
Puberty begins 18 to 24 months before that.
Yeah.
So it's similar here, which is you don't wait until they just start asking the questions. If you have a 14-year-old boy who's in puberty, that's too late to then start those conversations and think that he's not ready.
Right.
So there is very little I can even think about that would be detrimental to starting younger. And we have these great books that even give you specific ages, like the Roby Harris series. I have 2 of her books here. For the 7 to 10-year-old group, we have It's So Amazing, and it's about eggs, sperm, birth, babies, and families. And it does talk about intercourse. I always give the caveat that it is, because we're talking about reproduction, it is a heteronormative approach, but what I do like about this book is they talk about all different types of family constellations. Yeah, and so I can show you sort of some of the images. Let me pick one here. So like this is the page that actually talks about intercourse.
Oh, nice. So people don't have to be afraid that they're going to be showing porno when they're trying to teach them.
and if you had a younger child than this, the 4 to 7 one is called It's Not the Stork, and it just starts out with talking about, first it talks about questions, a chapter on questions, that it's normal to have questions, and then about body parts from the back and how we're all the same, and then body parts from the front, how we're mostly the same but a little bit different, and it slowly takes you and your child through these discussions.
Yay.
And then this one builds on it for the 7 to 10-year-old. And then this one, It's Perfectly Normal, Changing Bodies, Growing Up, Sex and Sexual Health. It's Perfectly Normal takes you on the journey of adolescence and puberty and all the different things that happen during that time.
Is it okay
including the chapter on self-touch, which is the other trigger issue for parents, which I think, and I could talk all about why it's really important for adolescents to know their body, experience their body, and touch their own body for so many reasons. I've done an entire white paper on it relating to females, but it's important because how else is a child supposed to understand their own body and as they grow, know what feels good to them? Because frankly, the last thing I would want for my kid is that their first partner educate them about their body. It also puts, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, this odd situation that many of us growing up, I'm sure we're in, which is, we have some sort of weird expectation that our partner who's of another gender is supposed to know what feels good to our body and vice versa. If we haven't been educated about bodies in general and what feels good, how are we supposed to know that? So about the other big piece of this is if a child, isn't shamed for self-touching, but rather they're just given boundaries about where that can happen. Honey, I see that your hands are in your pants. That's something you do in your bedroom or the bathroom. Totally matter of fact. You set that boundary.
So you walk into the living room or you whatever.
Yeah, and say, honey, I know that feels good, but that is something we do in our bedroom or bathroom. If we, meaning encourage, meaning allow that and give boundaries, later when they're in adolescence, there's a lot of sexual charge going on, which is normative.
Right.
They have a place to release that instead of looking outside of themselves at an early age. Basically, when in the early ages of adolescence, encouraging celibacy, at least they can deal with those desires that are coming up. So that's another good reason to have that. But just for their own sexual satisfaction, they deserve that. I'm a big believer in children have human rights, and their human right is to understand their body, be told about their body, what it can do, how it functions, and also how they can make it feel good. Doesn't mean we're giving them lessons about masturbation, but what we're letting them know, like in the Roby Harris book series, like I said, she has a chapter on that. She just talks about that some people do this, and that it feels good, and that it's important to know your body and experience it. So that's my thing.
I can imagine. I can imagine my grandmother, true Bostonian, would not have read me that book, but she might have bought it and just sort of left it around.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's really important because I call that the book fairy. Right. There's usually, in workshops, I'll say, did you have omission, which is what most people had. Parents just didn't talk about anything.
Yeah.
Did you have the book fairy?
Right.
Which is, all of a sudden came home and there was that book, on your bed somehow, and you have no idea where it came from. There was no explanation. Yeah. And then there's a few who will say, the book was given to them by a parent and said, hey, if you have any questions, let me know. And then
but please don't have any questions.
Please don't have any, please. And then, usually in very big workshops, like when I've done it at UNE at the med school, and I've done med students, there's usually maybe only one student who will say, oh, I got what I needed. I had a doctor mother or a nurse father or whatever, and they got it. But that's so rare. Mm-hmm. So what I would say is at the very bare minimum is letting your kids know there are resources for them. That's the absolute bare minimum. A step up from that would be letting them know that you're there for them and that you know this is important and here's a book. And then the gold star, and really what we want to aspire to is that this is a normal part of life and we need to talk about this. This, you know, we talk about alcohol, we talk about drugs, we talk about safety. Why aren't we talking about this? That's how we taboo sexuality.
So let's talk about
I'm getting
parents.
passionate now.
Right? I love that about you.
I think we're venturing into another show now.
Well, I do want to talk about parents who allow their girls to be on birth control knowing that they have a boyfriend and that they want to be sexually active. So as we're moving pre-adolescent into adolescent, the adolescent girl, I know parents who have allowed their 15 and a half, she's almost 16-year-old, to be on birth control because they know she has a boyfriend and that there's probably sexual activity. I know some parents who allow the 16-year-old to have their boyfriend spend the night in a different room, yeah, right, and that the daughter could spend the night over at his parents' house in a different room. It's just all sort of don't ask, don't tell.
Well, you're bringing in values.
So, okay, so values.
It's values, and I think if I were sitting, I also do, you know, individual parent consultations, meaning for people who workshops are not their thing, I have, people will call me up with either an emergency, like there's been a situation, there's porn on my kid's tablet, or, you know, my kid is asking kids at school to lift up their dress and wants to see things, what do I do? So I do those consultations, and if I had parents who came in, or a parent who came in and said, you know, I'm not sure about this decision about putting my daughter on some sort of birth control and her age and whatever, I would want to sit with them and understand, okay, I hear, you know, that's your value, that's what you think you want to do. Now, help me understand, what is the spirit, energy, and motivation behind that?
I love that.
Because
so they
if
have
it's
you
fear,
as a resource.
If it's fear,
I don't want her to get pregnant. I don't want her to do it behind my back.
Yeah, well, I don't want her to get pregnant. And then I would ask, great, how are you supporting that decision? Are you educating her? Are you providing her with resources? Are you communicating with her? Are you teaching about healthy relationships? Because if they're just doing that to kind of check the box so they're not an early grandparent, then that's not doing enough.
Right.
Then that's the spirit and the intent is just to not have to deal with it. The other thing you bring up that's important for adolescents is that idea of, you know, birth control. Well, that's all well and good, but that does not in any way protect against sexually transmitted infections.
Right.
You know, I talked with a GYN friend of mine earlier in the spring, and we were actually talking to a group of girls, and we were talking about how, you know, historically we talked about gonorrhea and chlamydia and HIV and
hepatitis.
Now HPV is rampant, according to the person I was sitting with. And so that I think not many parents, not only are they not talking often about contraception, they're not talking about double contraception. One for the safety of your health and well-being in your body, and then also protection from an unwanted pregnancy. So those are topics that are not getting talked about.
You know, the other thing that has recently come up for me is a 16-year-old girl, and her grandfather talked to me about her really hanging on him inappropriately. Now, we have recently found out that she was sexually abused, which I really alters a lot of things. Sure. But he said how uncomfortable, he said a red flag about her being sexually abused was how sort of the sexual energy that she was giving to the men in the family. He said, including himself, how uncomfortable she came to visit, she lives in another state, and how he was really uncomfortable. She was hanging on him and he didn't know what to do. So as these young girls are developing, and maybe how they're hugging or cuddling or whatever with their dad or uncle or whatever, when a man feels uncomfortable for whatever reason, what is an appropriate response without shaming the female, and it could go both ways, mind you.
Could go either way, and
Yeah.
I think we don't even have to take it to an extreme example with regards to abuse, but what about that child who, because I have dads who ask me this, like,
Right.
I had a dad recently in my private practice talking about, I used to lay in bed with her and we would talk, and now she's going through adolescence, and there's in the literature we see a lot that dads tend to back out a little bit when adolescence hits, and what we know is we need them to step in. And so my advice to him was, where you used to snuggle in bed with her, maybe you can invite her to lunch. Take her to lunch. Maybe you can go do an activity, go hiking together. Maybe it's not in bed, you're sitting on the couch and, she's got her feet up on your lap and, you're rubbing her toes or something. But there are ways to hang in there through adolescence that are so critically important, but without putting yourself in a situation. And so just back to your example, though, a little bit of what would be a response? Like, how would you, without shaming, like,
shaming.
It could be if it's maybe if it's a close relative, like a parent or depending on what the relationship is like. But the person might be able to be a good educator about boundaries and consent. Like, I see how much you want to hug me, but, I have my personal space too. I'd love a high five, or, can we hold hands? Something different, but having somebody in that child's life who is helping them set healthy boundaries. That is really important to ask. Like, I'm happy to hug you, but I just need you to ask. That's kind of my boundary. So talking about, getting those boundary discussions in.
So the same would be true for moms and a 14-year-old boy. Instead of laying in bed, having conversations, they can do the same thing. They can go for a hike.
I think we're on this topic for another show.
Yeah.
You think? We're in adolescence.
I thought we were in adolescence.
Yeah, we're in adolescence.
We're coming up on the time, but we're limited in time.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So
We're coming up on a time clock here.
Okay.
So wrapping up, how would you want to end this segment? Because we're going to have you back.
Yeah, I did want to say, about that brain stuff that I mentioned earlier. I think it is so important to know about our child's brain and what's going on, because so many of us feel like we always ask the question, like, what are you doing? How many times in adolescence when you see your child do something, you're like, why did you do that? What are you doing? What Dan Siegel, who is Dr. Dan Siegel, who writes Brainstorm and The Whole Brain Child, Brainstorm is an excellent book about, I didn't bring it today, an excellent book about adolescent brain. When we know what is appropriate for them and what their brain is going through and doing, it really helps us understand them. Risk-taking is a part of adolescence. What we need to do is help put them into situations where the risk-taking has less opportunity to harm them. So for example, I was teaching a bunch of 8th graders that it would be, you want to take risks because your brain is looking for that stimulation. So maybe it means you're going to go rock climbing, with a group, a guided rock climbing, versus going out and swimming to a buoy at night.
Right.
Like finding, so I often will educate parents that it's, try to have these brain stimulating, that are going to stimulate those hormones that want the excitement.
With a safety net.
With a safety net. Take them roller coasters, take them rock climbing, rapids, anything that's going to do that. So I just wanted to finish up about that and how important, and bring in Dan Siegel's book. So I think if I wanted to tell parents what they can do is really, it's important that they not just rely on, hey, I made it through. Because when I turn that question around and ask them, okay, you made it through, you're here today, but if we went back and asked you that question, did you have everything you needed in adolescence to make good, solid, healthy decisions about your sexuality and your body and through adolescence? Almost every single participant will say no. Our kids deserve better than that. And we can give it to them. There's really no excuse. We spend money on learning new languages. We spend money on getting education about how to care for our babies when they're born. Why not this? You can go out and buy a book. You can attend a $45 workshop. This is so critically important. I can't stress it enough, because it has those ripple effects. When it goes well, you get great positive outcomes. When it doesn't, we don't.
That is a topic that we will end the show on, with the thought of returning to this topic on another show because we're up against the clock.
Great.
Yeah.
I appreciate it,
And
Bob. Thanks for keeping the time for us.
This is be kind to the producer's time.
Yes.
Because if we go over the clock, it creates a lot more work for them.
That's right.
And I don't want to
Well,
do that
good.
because they do too many good things for
Yes,
us.
they
Appreciate
do.
it.
We
Thank
appreciate
you.
them.
Thanks
Thank
for
you so
having
much
me.
for coming.
Jennifer, it's
Thank
been
you,
a pleasure.
Bob. Thank you.
And I'm so glad, and I say this often, I'm glad when I grew up and where I grew up. I would not want to be growing up in today's world.
It's tough.
It is more challenging than I could have ever imagined.
Definitely.
But with that, I will bid you a fond farewell. Have a great day, folks. Be safe out there. Simplify your life, and know that God blesses you. Have a good day. Bye bye.